They fired me thinking I was just another disposable employee. What they didn't know, I was about to hijack their entire campaign, cost them over $300,000, and walk away with a fat $40,000 paycheck. This is the story of how I turned being fired into the best financial decision of my life, and got my toxic boss fired in the process. When I first stepped through the glass doors of Northbridge University, I thought I had landed the opportunity of a lifetime. It was early 2012, and the world of online video was still taking shape. YouTube was barely into its adolescence, and institutions like Northbridge were finally beginning to realize that grainy campus tours and outdated brochures weren't cutting it anymore. They needed content. Real content. And that's where I came in. I had just wrapped up a string of freelance gigs, some music videos, wedding edits, a few promotional reels, and was ready for something stable. The university's job listing was vague but promising: digital content creator for their new outreach initiative. I'd be tasked with launching their video presence from the ground up. No team, no guidelines, just an email from the communications director and a contract offering $2,200 a month. The pay wasn't great, but the pitch was enticing. Creative freedom, they said. A blank canvas. Looking back, that phrase should have been my first red flag. On my second day, I was pulled into a cramped meeting room with my direct manager, Valerie Grant. Valerie was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, all sharp smiles and corporate buzzwords. She handed me a folder marked KPIs, and gestured proudly like she was presenting a blueprint for the future. Inside was a single page. Objective: 85 unique videos, 10 minutes in length, within 52 weeks. I blinked. Is this for a full team? I asked, half joking. Valerie gave a breezy laugh. Oh no, just you. We trust your creativity. Besides, if the quality's there, I'm not too worried about the quantity. That last line would haunt me. I skimmed the rest of the packet. I'd be responsible for scripting, filming, editing, and publishing, all of it. The university's equipment: 2 dusty DSLRs that couldn't even output 720p without freezing. The editing computer in the comms office ran Windows Vista and crashed if you tried to open more than one window at a time. I had no choice but to bring my own gear. My own camera, my own editing rig, my own software licenses, all for $2,200 a month. But I was hungry, ambitious, and foolishly trusting. So I rolled up my sleeves. The first month was a blur. I mapped out concepts, scouted departments to feature, held casting calls with faculty and students, built a content calendar, and shot 5 videos in the first 3 weeks. Valerie, at the time, seemed pleased. She'd swing by my cubicle now and then with a cup of coffee and offer vague praise like, "You're a magician with this stuff," or, "No one here even knows how to plug in a mic, thank God you're around." It felt good to be appreciated. Until it didn't. Everything changed the day she found out I smoked. It wasn't dramatic. I had just stepped outside during lunch, as I always did, and ran into Lena, one of the senior staffers in the IT department. We chatted, laughed, and I offhandedly mentioned needing a smoke to clear my head after editing all morning. She went dead silent. A few beats later, she said, "You might not want Valerie to hear that. She's got a thing about smokers. A thing. She's gunning to turn this place into a wellness-first campus. Thinks smokers are a bad look for branding." The next morning, Valerie's sunny demeanor had vanished. She didn't make eye contact when she passed my desk. No more coffee chats. No more compliments. In their place came notes. Dozens of them. "You smell like smoke after lunch. It's unprofessional. Your lunch breaks are too long. You're unavailable. Why weren't you online at 7:38 a.m.? 3 minutes late clocking in on Thursday, again. Never mind that I was working weekends, pulling 12-hour days to keep up with the impossible KPI. Or that the 5 videos I'd published had quadrupled the school's YouTube traffic in just 2 months. None of it mattered anymore. I'd gone from being the creative genius to the underperforming liability, all because I smoked. Still, I pressed on. I wasn't going to quit just because someone in HR decided I smelled like bad PR. But deep down, something in me had shifted. I knew I was being set up. The warmth was gone. The tone had changed. And I could feel the trap closing in around me, one video shortfall at a time. By month 5, the writing was on the wall. I was exhausted. I had produced 30 solid videos, each one planned, filmed, edited, scored, and published entirely by me. That was more content in 5 months than most 3-person teams at small agencies could crank out in a year, especially with no support, no budget, and no team. But to Valerie Grant, it wasn't enough. She didn't acknowledge the numbers, didn't care that Northbridge University's YouTube channel had gone from an abandoned relic with a few hundred views total to a legitimate recruitment tool with tens of thousands of hits. My content was being used in faculty meetings, open house presentations, social media posts. But every time I passed Valerie's office, the door seemed to close a little faster. And then came the meeting. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the email. Subject: 3 p.m. meeting with Director Elmhurst. Please bring a copy of your progress report. My stomach dropped. Valerie didn't even CC me, her assistant did. That was the first clue this wasn't a performance check-in. This was something else. I showed up to the conference room 10 minutes early. Valerie was already there, seated next to Director Penelope Elmhurst, head of the communications department. Valerie wore that carefully curated expression I'd come to associate with thinly veiled contempt. Chin slightly raised, hands folded neatly, lips pressed just tight enough to feign professionalism. Elmhurst looked tired. Not angry, just disappointed in that cold, bureaucratic way higher-ups are when they've already made their decision and just want to get through the formality. Let's get straight to it, she began. We're at the halfway mark of the content cycle, and you've delivered only 30 videos out of the 85 you agreed to. I didn't agree to that number, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. That was the target Valerie presented, but she also told me quality was the priority, not quantity. I've been working 60-hour weeks, and I've increased your audience reach by 400%. Valerie let out a small, deliberate sigh. Elmhurst didn't flinch. The KPI was clear. The board expects deliverables. We need to make strategic adjustments. There it was. Corporate 4. You're done. I leaned forward. With all due respect, how do you plan to meet that quota after letting go of the only person producing content? Valerie spoke before Elmhurst could. We'll be outsourcing the remainder of the project to a professional production house. People who can deliver the volume we need. I stared at her, stunned. That's going to cost you 5 times more. She smiled, eyes sharp and empty. Let us worry about that. Elmhurst nodded. We appreciate your efforts, but we're going in another direction. You'll receive your final paycheck at the end of the month. There was nothing more to say. I stood, shook hands robotically, and walked out of the room with the kind of hollowed-out rage that only comes when you've been gutted by someone who smiled at you while doing it. But as I reached the end of the hallway, a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. The database. Among the many roles I'd taken on, one of them was managing the university's external production vendor list. Dozens of studios, directors, freelancers, editors, collected over time and kept organized in a shared spreadsheet on our internal server. Valerie didn't know a single soul in that world. She'd need those contacts. She'd need my list. And suddenly, I realized I had the upper hand. I didn't go home that night. Not right away. Instead, I stayed in the darkened office long after everyone had left, the only light coming from my dual monitors and the greenish glow of a flickering exit sign down the hall. There was a storm building inside me, not the kind you shout into the void, but the kind you sharpen. I had been fired under false pretenses, lied to, set up, humiliated. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Valerie might have tossed me aside, but she'd underestimated one thing. I didn't just create content for Northbridge, I had built the infrastructure that would carry the entire campaign. Including the external production vendor index. The spreadsheet sat innocently in our shared drive, hidden behind an obscure file name, ext_mktg_refs_011. Valerie wouldn't even know where to look for it if I hadn't trained her assistant to access it. It was my little corner of leverage. And now, it would become my weapon. I opened the file and began methodically corrupting every single entry, every production house contact. Replaced with dead-end phone numbers, emails, swapped out for fake addresses or typos that would bounce, websites, redirected to parked domains or outdated splash pages. I left only one contact intact, a boutique agency called Prime Frame Studios. That one wasn't random. I knew exactly who ran Prime Frame, Jasper Lin, a close friend of mine from college who had recently been promoted to junior director. The studio was small, but Jasper was sharp, talented, and eager to prove himself. We'd kept in touch over the years, trading freelance gigs and ideas. Now, I had the opportunity to hand him the biggest client he'd ever seen. I picked up my phone and called him. "Jas," I said, skipping the pleasantries, "I've got a win-win opportunity for you. You're about to get a call from a desperate university trying to finish a massive video project in record time. I'll coach you on exactly how to pitch it, what language to use, how to mirror their tone. In return, I want a standard finder's fee, 15% of whatever you quote them." He didn't hesitate. Deal. 10 minutes later, I was on a call with PrimeFrame's general manager. When I explained the scope, 50-plus videos in under 4 months with a 6-figure budget on the line, his voice actually cracked. "You're serious? Serious enough that I'll write your proposal myself," I said. Within 48 hours, Jasper and his team were invited to pitch. As predicted, Valerie reached out to a few vendors for bids, but all the other contacts bounced or failed to reply. Jasper's team walked in looking like saviors. With my guidance, their deck hit every nerve: agility, content alignment, university values, branding consistency. They even referenced specific projects I had created, using the same visual language and pacing to make it seem like they got Northbridge better than anyone else. Valerie and director Elmhurst were floored. "How do you know so much about our internal goals?" Elmhurst asked. According to Jasper, his answer: "We've done our homework." They signed him on the spot. The first check cleared within a week. PrimeFrame billed Northbridge just under $300,000 for a 16-week sprint. That was over 110 times what I had made in a month. With my 15% cut baked into the contract, I was suddenly sitting on a $45,000 payday, half up front, the rest to follow in stages. When the wire hit my account, I just stared at it for a minute. I hadn't just gotten even. I had just been paid for being fired. By the time PrimeFrame wrapped their 3rd week of production, it was clear the university thought they had struck gold. Jasper updated me regularly, and every story he told me just added another layer of quiet satisfaction. Valerie was practically glowing in meetings. According to Jasper, she had taken full credit for identifying the perfect external partner, despite the fact she hadn't even known PrimeFrame existed until they showed up in the database. Director Elmhurst was cautiously optimistic, probably still smarting from the way I'd been dismissed, but the early footage looked polished, professional, and polished enough to keep her quiet. But beneath the surface, the budget was hemorrhaging. Each video was costing them between $5,000 to $7,000. Multiply that by 50-plus videos, and you're looking at a mid-6-figure invoice. Northbridge University's total budget for the digital outreach initiative. According to the original project scope buried in the hiring packet I'd received, it was capped at $50,000. And they were about to spend 6 times that. See, Valerie had been so determined to cover her ass that she never double-checked with finance before signing off on the project with PrimeFrame. She assumed the communications department had full discretion over the budget. They didn't. And the chancellor, yes, the actual chancellor, was known for keeping a hawk's eye on experimental spending. It was only a matter of time before someone upstairs took a closer look at where the money was going. While Valerie played executive producer and basked in secondhand praise, I took my first real vacation in years. I flew out to Croatia, then hopped to Italy. PrimeFrame's payments came in like clockwork, $22,500 up front, with another $22,500 split over milestones. I used the first chunk to cover all my travel expenses and the rest to secure enrollment in a post-production intensive at a respected film school in Vancouver. It was everything I'd wanted from the beginning. A chance to evolve, to sharpen my craft. And now, funded by the very people who had tossed me aside, I was sitting in a beachside cafe in Dubrovnik when I got the call. It was Lena, the same IT staffer who had warned me months ago about Valerie's hatred of smokers. We hadn't spoken since I left Northbridge. Her voice crackled through the line, half choked with laughter and disbelief. "You're not gonna believe what just happened." "Oh," I said, sipping espresso. "Try me. They fired Valerie." I blinked. "Wait. What?" She got dragged into a closed-door meeting with the chancellor and director Elmhurst. Something about exceeding departmental budget without prior authorization. And get this, they spent over $550,000 on the campaign. The chancellor went ballistic. I let out a slow whistle. She approved every invoice personally, Lena continued. Apparently, she was trying to show Elmhurst that she could complete the campaign without you and make it look even better. But she never got financial clearance. I leaned back in my chair, sunlight warming my face as the Adriatic waves rolled in behind me. What about Elmhurst? I asked. Still here, for now, Lena said. But word is, she's been sidelined. Chancellor was furious. They only allocated a fraction of what got spent. He's demanding a full audit. I chuckled. That's wild. You're not fooling me, she said. You did this, didn't you? I didn't say yes. I didn't have to. A few days later, Jasper confirmed everything. After Prime Frame submitted their final invoice, Valerie's signature authorization was questioned by finance. When they reviewed the ledger, it showed the contract had ballooned well past the authorized amount, with no oversight, no escalation. Valerie had gone rogue to make herself look like a savior, but in doing so, she broke the cardinal rule of any institution. Never spend money you weren't given. Director Elmhurst, whether out of loyalty or fear, backed her decision. That, of course, made her complicit. But neither of them realized that the miracle vendor, who saved their campaign, was just the long arm of the very guy they tossed out like trash. And that was the most poetic part of it all. By the time I returned from Europe, everything at Northbridge had changed, though I didn't need to be on campus to see it. The fallout from the Valerie debacle had rippled far beyond the walls of the communications department. Jasper sent me a screenshot of a leaked internal memo with the subject line, "Urgent. All future external contracts must be pre-approved by finance translation." Valerie had created such a disaster that the university had implemented a brand new policy just to make sure no one like her could ever pull this kind of stunt again. Her name wasn't mentioned, of course, but everyone knew. Lena later told me the nickname going around was the Grant Clause. But what surprised me most wasn't the firings or the financial audit, it was how many people came out of the woodwork afterward. Over the next few months, I received messages from former colleagues, even people I barely knew, thanking me for what I did. Some guessed, some didn't, but all of them knew that something had happened behind the scenes. One by one, they started telling me their own stories, how Valerie had blocked raises, bad-mouthed junior staffers, hoarded credit for their ideas. How Elmhurst routinely ignored complaints unless someone had tenure or leverage. Turns out, I wasn't just a casualty. I was part of a pattern. And now, that pattern had snapped. I started documenting everything: emails, project records, timestamps, even the original KPI packet Valerie gave me. I wanted a complete record of how I'd been treated, not because I was planning to sue, although, for a time, I seriously considered it, but because I wanted to understand what really happened. How did a place that promised creativity and empowerment turn so quickly into a trap? The answer was depressingly simple. They never expected me to push back. Northbridge's internal culture thrived on silence. On staffers keeping their heads down and doing enough to not get noticed. When Valerie hired me, she thought I was going to be an easy win, a disposable contractor she could control. But I didn't play by that script. I worked too hard, delivered too much, and expected to be treated fairly. That's what made me dangerous. And now they were paying for it. Meanwhile, Prime Frame Studios was flourishing. Jasper, once just a junior director hustling for smaller gigs, had been promoted to head of creative strategy. Their contract with Northbridge led to several new university clients, all impressed by their unusually effective onboarding process and unmatched understanding of campus culture. I smiled every time I heard that. They were quoting my playbook, word for word. The second phase of my payment came in just before the winter holidays, another $22,500, wired straight into my business account. I used part of it to pay off my remaining student loans, then put the rest into building out my own boutique content studio. Not for clients like Northbridge, but for creators, artists, and small nonprofits who actually valued storytelling over KPIs. In the months that followed, I started mentoring other young creatives, many of them freelancers who had been similarly burned by institutions that promised freedom and delivered burnout. I gave them contract templates, pricing guides, and, most importantly, strategies for protecting themselves. One of them, a recent graduate named Mel, told me she'd almost accepted a university job that looked suspiciously like mine had. When she showed me the job description, I recognized the language immediately. Multi-platform content generation, independent project management, self-owned gear preferred. It was a trap. She turned it down. Landed a better gig at a creative agency 2 weeks later. That felt like revenge, too, but not the fiery, cinematic kind I had originally craved. This was quieter, sharper, more lasting. Because real revenge isn't about screaming at the people who wronged you. It's about making sure their system can't hurt someone else the same way. It's about thriving in front of them, and building something better without them. That's what I was doing now, in Northbridge. They were still licking their wounds. The audit had revealed widespread budget inconsistencies, and Elmhurst had quietly been reassigned to a research role, pending departmental restructuring. No title, no public statement. Just a slow fade into institutional obscurity. As for Valerie, last I heard, she was freelancing. Her LinkedIn tagline now read, creative strategist and project consultant. Available for short-term contracts. I couldn't have written a better ending myself. I used to think revenge was an endpoint. Something clean. You suffer, you strike back, and that's it. Roll credits, justice served. But life doesn't work like that. The aftermath lingers, grows roots. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it blossoms into something more useful than rage. For me, that transformation started about 6 months after Valerie's firing. I was back in Vancouver by then, halfway through the post-production course I'd enrolled in using the prime frame payout. The program was intense. Color theory, advanced editing techniques, motion graphics, sound design, but for the first time in years, I wasn't creating out of survival. I wasn't racing deadlines or juggling impossible expectations. I was building something for myself. One evening, while wrapping up a group project, one of my instructors, a grizzled, low-voice veteran of the Canadian film scene, pulled me aside. "I looked you up," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. "You worked at Northbridge, didn't you?" I hesitated. "Yeah, briefly." He smiled. "Thought so. I've seen a few of their recent campaign videos. Lot of your fingerprints still on them." I didn't know whether to laugh or feel violated. "Well, I guess I left a mark." "You did more than that," he said. "You built a blueprint. I've got 2 students from Saskatchewan trying to pitch something similar to their university. You should talk to them." That's how it began. Not with some huge speaking engagement or a viral thread. Just a quiet connection. One burned-out student sharing a cautionary tale with another. I showed them how to protect their time, how to write contracts with revision limits, how to value themselves before a client decided for them. Word spread. Soon, I was doing Zoom calls with young filmmakers from Toronto, then Montreal, then Chicago. Some were students. Others were early career creatives trying to freelance full-time without being chewed up by the same kind of corporate exploitation I'd endured. It became clear that my story, ridiculous as it sometimes sounded, wasn't unique. People everywhere were dealing with the same dynamics: unrealistic expectations, vague job descriptions, predatory contracts, clueless management. And worst of all, the constant pressure to be grateful just for getting the opportunity. That's when I decided to formalize it. I launched a site, creativecommonssense.io, part blog, part resource hub, part digital soapbox. I published the full Northbridge story anonymized, of course, alongside a breakdown of the contract I had used with Prime Frame, templates for negotiating freelance gigs, and a list of red flag phrases to avoid in job listings. Within 6 weeks, the site was averaging 20,000 visitors a month. Some nights I'd stay up reading emails from readers around the world. "Thank you for helping me walk away from a gig that didn't respect me. I used your template to renegotiate a project. Got 25% more. Your story made me realize I wasn't the problem, I was being set up to fail." That last one hit me hardest. Because I'd spent months thinking I was the failure at Northbridge. That I hadn't done enough, hadn't worked hard enough, hadn't pushed back the right way. But now I saw it clearly. The failure had never been mine. It was theirs. A system designed to extract everything from you while offering nothing in return. And I wasn't alone. I'd tapped into something bigger than one corporate grudge. This was about dignity, creative survival, justice. Funny thing is, I still hadn't told Jasper the full story. Sure, he knew I helped him get the contract. He knew I'd taken a finder's fee and helped him win the pitch. But he didn't know the depth of it. How calculated the sabotage had been. How deliberate. I finally told him one night over dinner in Vancouver. He laughed so hard he almost spit out his wine. You mean you rigged the entire vendor pool just to make sure we were the only ones who got the call? I grinned. You didn't think it was a coincidence, did you? He shook his head. You magnificent bastard. That night, we toasted not just the money or the outcome, but the clarity. We'd both been underestimated, underpaid, overlooked, but we had flipped the script. And now, we were helping others do the same. A year after I was fired from Northbridge, I found myself back in the city. I wasn't planning to go near campus. I had long moved on, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. The invitation came through one of my former classmates from Vancouver, now working in PR for a national student media conference. They were looking for a last-minute speaker after someone dropped out. Topic: Modern content careers and creative independence. I agreed without thinking too hard about it. It felt like a good way to give back. I wasn't expecting the event to be hosted at Northbridge's conference center. When I arrived, I recognized almost nothing. The university had renovated the entire East Wing. Glossy new signage, sleek media lab posters, even a cafe that didn't look like a time capsule. But some things hadn't changed. The staff badges still had that institutional beige. The IT techs still wore the same brand of boredom on their faces. And then, walking past the back hallway of the communications building, I saw a nameplate I hadn't expected to see. Elmhurst, Penelope. Research and archiving tucked in a narrow office with no windows, no assistants, no foot traffic. Just a name, gathering dust in a place no one cared about. Her strategic reassignment had turned out to be permanent exile. I stood there for a moment, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. This was the real end of the story. Not the beach in Croatia. Not the prime frame contract. Not even the tens of thousands I'd earned from the revenge arc. It was this, walking back into the place that tried to bury me, standing taller, stronger, and freer than I had ever been. And seeing the people who hurt me frozen in place, while I had evolved. My talk that day went well. I spoke about burnout, manipulation, digital overreach, and the myth of the dream job. I told the audience what I wished someone had told me: if a place hires you for your creativity but expects you to burn out quietly, run. If your job description changes every week, but your pay never does, walk away. If they treat your boundaries like inconvenience, not protection, they don't deserve your work. Afterward, a line of students waited to speak with me. Some had notebooks, others had tear-lined cheeks. Every single one of them had a story. A gig that went south. A boss that gaslit them. A contract that bled them dry. One girl, no older than 21, handed me a folded sheet of paper. I was going to sign this tomorrow, she said. Now I'm not so sure. It was an internship agreement. Unpaid. With a clause that allowed the company to own all creative assets produced during the duration of employment, even outside office hours. I circled the clause in red. Shred this, I said. And send them your version. That was the moment I knew I'd become something more than a freelancer. I was no longer just the guy who got fired, got even, and got paid. I was now the guy who knew how to fight back, and taught others how to do the same. That's what real revenge is. Not a single blow, not a final twist of the knife. It's longevity. It's outliving the system. It's showing up, years later, and seeing that the people who underestimated you aren't even playing the same game anymore. These days, I run a creative collective with a team of freelancers I trust like family. We take on purpose-driven campaigns, small business launches, and community storytelling projects. We charge what we're worth, respect one another's time, and take pride in saying no more often than we say yes. Sometimes, I still think about Northbridge. Not with bitterness, but with perspective. They paid me $2,200 a month to carry a campaign on my back. Then they paid $300,000 to replace me. And in doing so, they funded everything that came next. That's the part they'll never understand. But I do. and so do the hundreds of creatives have helped since. And that's worth more than any paycheck they ever could have offered me.